But we are going to be talking about Star Trek Picard. We're going to be talking about episode 3. I believe at the end is the beginning, which makes you think of that Smashing Pumpkins song from Batman and Robin, which they used in the trailer and the marketing material for Watchmen, which I thoroughly loved. I know some people don't like Watchmen, but I quite enjoyed the Zack Snyder Watchmen film. That's such a great comment. Did you see Bobby Chambers' comment?
Space, the eventual frontier.
That's good.
That's a good sum up. I don't think we need to say anything.
Yeah,
that's a good sum up.
That's got it right there.
Bobby, you hit the nail right on the head.
Yep.
Space, the eventual frontier. Man, that really does sum up my thoughts on this episode very well. Bobby, you hit it. You hit it out of the ballpark as far as I'm concerned.
That's a great example of packaging something and selling it where everybody gets it like that. That of course, I don't think they'd want to use that as the tagline for this show, the eventual frontier.
Probably not. Probably not. We'll get to Chabon's comments when we get into spoiler territory. We'll get into his stuff, the stuff that I'm going to nitpick to death, and his responses. But let's start out, Dave. Overall impressions. What do you think?
Just like the last one, I saw no reason to rewatch this. So I watched it one time. I liked it better than the last episode. I enjoyed seeing Picard in uniform for the little bit at the beginning. I feel like that we haven't spent, like, we kind of know a little bit about this Raffi character because we read the Countdown comic. But even in the Countdown comic, they didn't spend a lot of time with her. And then I watched, we need to stay with initial impressions. Good. We were discussing, but not great. We were discussing that we hope that this third episode, like if you could see all three of them in one sitting, it might bring it together a little bit better. I didn't hate it. It was okay. I'm just having a hard time processing the idea that Starfleet is the enemy. I'm just having a hard time with that at the end of the day. I mean, you can see all the gray hairs in my head. I'm obviously an old dude. So I'm just having a hard time with the concept of Starfleet as the enemy. So that my whole initial impression was it was good. I'm still going to continue to watch it because I want to see what they're going to do. But based off these 3 episodes, I don't know. It's both interesting and dismaying at the same time for me. Maybe by the end of the season, I'll feel differently about it. We have we don't want to get into it, but that's my initial thoughts. What were your initial impressions of this episode of Star Trek Picard?
Well, my initial impression is it's better than episode 2. That was the one thing, because I was so upset with episode 2. I felt a little bit of relief with this one because I felt this was better than episode 2. Comparing it now to episode 2, I can almost now say, yeah, I hate episode 2. Episode 3 is not that bad. You know what I mean? Because one of the things we talked about before and has become very obvious, the premiere, the official premiere that was done, that the cast and crew attended and all that kind of stuff in Hollywood, London, they did the first 3 episodes, and it's very clear the first 3 episodes are a story. You know what I mean? One of the problems with this trend towards serialized storytelling, and we've talked about this off the air, is in my mind, you end up slacking on certain episodes because you're trying to tell the story. And Picard is a great example of the pitfalls of that and how it can really screw an episode up, and also how I think the limitations of serialized storytelling in the quote modern era and in Star Trek. What happens is, you've always had quote unquote throwaway episodes in Star Trek, but at least they were always a coherent story. There's a beginning, a middle, and end. When you do serialized storytelling, you tend to lose that a little bit. And I think Picard is suffering from that because Picard episode 2 is very much sort of a middle episode. This episode, there's so much going on. Like I'm almost afraid of how if I'm going to be able to review it properly because it jumps around so much, and it has so much stuff to kind of get done. Because basically we have 2 episodes of setup, episode 1 and 2, and this is the first episode where something actually happens, for lack of a better term, like where we actually get somewhere, and now the story seems to be actually moving. We hope, because apparently the team is not together completely yet. That's like a little bit of a spoiler, but not really, because this episode is really about collecting the crew, if you will. But apparently the crew's not all collected yet, and we're in episode 3. But I will say, when you take episode 1, 2, and 3 together, yeah, there's a story there. Individually, they have a lot of flaws, a lot of weaknesses, a lot of problems. Again, because of the limitations of serialized storytelling, at least in this context. I think there are ways you can make it work. I was thinking about comparing this show to The Mandalorian. And The Mandalorian, at times, I was kind of confused because I didn't quite understand the format. And now I realize what The Mandalorian was doing was they were combining the episodic and serialized format together. So you would have an episode that was clearly part of the larger story of Baby Yoda, but then you'd have an episode that was essentially just a side quest and really had no implications to the larger story at all. And when I think about it, I'm kind of like, I think I like The Mandalorian's approach better than Star Trek Picard so far. I remember that this was pitched as a 30-hour movie. That's the way this was pitched, was that this is going to be like a 30-hour movie. It's going to be 3 seasons to tell the entire story, because it's going to be 10 episodes each season. Of course, it's not going to be quite 30 hours because, interestingly enough, these are not hour-long episodes, which is another gripe of mine. I don't understand that. I had that gripe with The Mandalorian too, that the episodes are too short, but the Mandalorians are even shorter than these. But I think there's some definite problems. Everybody, for whatever reason, the serialized storytelling has become all the rage in genre entertainment. I think Game of Thrones has a big reason to do with that because of the massive success of Game of Thrones. But I'm seeing the limitations here, and I'm seeing the problems, especially for Trek, when you're doing this kind of format. Because just like Bobby said, space, the eventual frontier, and that's what this story feels like. If you go through parts 1 through 3, it takes a long time to get to the point where I want to be at. Which in any other Star Trek show, we're already in space in the first episode. And this is called Star Trek, okay? This is Star Trek. So the fact that it takes us 3 episodes to get into space, and I guess that's also a little minor spoiler. I don't think that's a big one. It's a little minor spoiler. But, I mean, yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I'm not a big fan of that at all.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It's just one of those things that how this episode started, I just kept thinking about, we would have started in uniform on a ship, you know what I mean, in a normal Star Trek story, from, frame 1. Well, we did. Frame 1, scene 1, we kind of did with that flashback sequence.
I've got the image up there right now, so that's the best image of the show, in my opinion. That's why I have it up there. And in this particular image, you can even see Hugh in the background there too. So,
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna watch it because I was excited for it, and I want to finish it. And there's they can still pull it together, and this could still be interesting. At the end of the day, there's a lot of intrigue with what they're trying to do. So I'm curious to see how it will unfold. But I can also see too about what they were talking about, how this is not Next Generation. This is not your usual Star Trek show. It's more of a drama than action adventure, which I don't mind that, but yeah, we spent a lot of time, before we kind of get at least some of the people assembled on the ship. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. We just spend a lot of time with Picard reflecting on the vineyard, just overall. And I think one episode of that could have been enough, but I don't know if we needed 3.
Right.
But so that's
we
definitely
go.
my.
Well, actually, we go from reflecting at the vineyard to reflecting in the trailer park. That's what happened in this episode. Right. So, yeah, I didn't really need any of that, to be honest with you. I didn't need it at all. So,
yeah.
Do we want to get into spoilers?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and get into spoilers, and then here real quick. Let's see. I was trying to figure out. So this is that one, and then yeah. So just real quick, I was doing the drawing, the drawing for the drawing. So just real quick, we'll do this and we'll get into spoilers. So just a reminder, this was the item that was up for. I just have a hard time getting this in frame because it always works backwards. This is the item that we had for our people who are commenting in the chat, and the winner of this sketch was Bobby Chambers. So congratulations, Bobby. I'm going to button that up with the other one. Like I said, I'm running a little behind on getting stuff in the mail because I needed some top loaders to put the cards in because I was concerned about the post office trying to origami them into like a duck or a boat. So those should be coming in soon. So I will just put this in with your sketch card that you won on a previous episode. So congratulations. All right. So let's go ahead and get back into the. Okay, here we go.
Bobby had a comment that the best part for me is watching the interaction between the crew. I agree with you, Bobby. Hey, come on. That is the essence of Trek for me with Spock, Kirk, and McCoy. It's the interaction. That's what makes that show even more than anything else. So then he says 3 hours later, and we're just getting there.
Yeah.
Exactly, Bobby. Yeah. You're so correct, and you're exactly on the same wavelength as me in terms of that thought. And also he is he's happy about about the prize there. So.
Well, and Bobby makes a good point because I kind of liked the roguish Han Solo ex-Starfleet guy that we met, the guy who actually has the ship that they eventually wind up on. I kind of like the doctor lady too. Like I find her the synthetic research scientist lady. Maybe she's not a doctor. You know what I mean? Like there's quite a few of these characters I found very interesting. The one character I'm hoping is going to grow on me is actually the Raffi character. I watched the Ready Room episode after this with Will Wheaton, and she just spent tons of time talking about this character and how excited she was for it. And then I was thinking back in the episode, and I'm like, well, I remember us seeing you vape something. I'm hoping as the show goes on, they're going to give us some flashbacks, so we're able to better relate with her character's struggles. We understand there's bad blood between
I'll
her
be
and
honest.
Picard, but
I'll be honest. The Ready Room did not help the case for Raffi, in my opinion. I've enjoyed watching the Ready Room with Will Wheaton. Obviously, I don't know the actress's name that plays Raffi, but she was the featured person on the Ready Room, and she talked a lot about the character and what her thing is and all that stuff. And I'll tell you, I feel like in another context it might be fine, but in Star Trek, she just doesn't get it. She just doesn't get it. And it's disappointing for me to see Will Wheaton, because I know he's a fan besides being a member of the cast. I've met Will Wheaton at conventions before. I've talked to him before. To not like at least call her out a little bit. And I realize that's probably not his thing. You know what I mean? I mean, it's one of those things. I think he's brought in to be the enthusiastic cheerleader. You know what I mean? And everything's good. Everything's wonderful. And it's always going to be softball questions. It's always going to be nodding yes, no matter what they say. They could talk about their admiration for Hitler, and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I get it." You know what I mean? I mean, it's just, you know what I mean? That's like, he's not going to challenge anything. The we can start at the beginning, with this image of the flashback to Starfleet Academy. Okay. And instantly this character, when there's this beautiful image that I have up right now of them in uniform, which we're not going to get any more of this. This is like the little fan service fun thing that we get as hardcore Star Trek fans, to see them in the new uniforms, the ones we saw them in the Countdown comic, because you and I actually read the Countdown comic. It's awesome getting to see Patrick Stewart in that uniform at least once. You know what I mean? And what is this scene? It's so depressing. It's so dire. It's so not Star Trek. Her cursing. I'm really sick of the cursing already. You know what I mean? Like it takes you out of it. The bullshit line. Come on. You know what I mean? She's supposed to be a Starfleet officer at this point. This is an admiral, and she's like a lieutenant commander or commander, depending. In the comics, she's a lieutenant commander. I can't tell the rank in this one, but she's a subordinate. And she's cursing at him, all the JL stuff, which I hated in the comic book to begin with. Seeing it on screen just made me cringe, the whole JL thing, because that's lazy. We all know what the JL thing is. The JL thing is a lazy writing construct to make us realize, oh, Picard and this lady are tight. We've never seen this lady before, but hey, dumb audience, they're tight because she calls them JL. That's what that is, right? I mean, that's exactly what that is. It's a lazy construct so that the audience is like, oh, I get it. They're good friends. The fact of the matter is, she is a subordinate to him, And by the way, Chabon did address this. So when we get to the Chabon comments, this is one of the things that were brought up. But it's like, I don't know. It just, this scene to me should have been so much fun, because this is like the only one we get to see where they're in Starfleet and all that stuff. And instead, it's just a very dark, depressing scene. And right off the bat, I'm already disliking Raffi because I don't feel like she fits in Star Trek.
Well, and in the Ready Room, they go out of their way to talk. She talks about the fact that she likes the idea that this isn't the kind of character you would normally see in Star Trek. And we've seen drug addicts, we've seen people with substance abuse problems before. It's not like this because here's the thing, okay? If she was a Starfleet officer struggling with this stuff, which again, we have seen this before in Star Trek, but maybe there's an argument to be made for that. But as far as just in general Star Trek characters suffering with substance abuse problems, we've had whole episodes about that. Like, whole pivotal episodes. So, the Ready Room thing did, because I was hoping that through that I would have a different perspective on it. But her character just seems to be really angry at Picard. And, I don't know. Her was the one character. I mean, maybe it'll turn around by the end. But as it currently stands, I mean, it's not that I hate her character. It's just, I just don't feel like they're doing anything terribly interesting with her character. Now, along the same lines, talking about drama that's terribly compelling, I might want to mention, my wife and I have actually been watching The Crown on Netflix. And that is a terribly interesting drama where people are just mostly just around talking with interesting situations. And this episode of Picard was not compelling from just a dramatic standpoint. The two of them sitting outside of Starfleet headquarters going, I gave them an ultimatum. What did they say? No. What happened? I resigned. Damn you. Okay. I don't know. It didn't really, I mean, if this episode had started off maybe with something like from the comic that we read, where Picard was locked up, you know what I mean? And she broke him out or something, and the flashback had a little bit more substance to it than just the two of them sitting in a courtyard going, well, everything's gone to hell.
I just want to mention, I always say, when it comes to licensed comic books, when it comes to comic books that are basically a spin-off of a television show or a movie, that kind of a thing, you always have to take them with a grain of salt. And the reason being is that the directors, the producers of the show probably don't read the comics. definitely don't care about the comics and will do whatever they want anyway. The Picard Countdown comic was kind of like marketed as a like this, like that's our first taste of Picard. This is like kind of this is canon. This is going to give us a backstory. It does talk about Raffi's in it, so we get to kind of see what the relationship is. But in this first scene, the premise is basically that Raffi suspects a Tal Shiar plot in the destruction of the Utopia Planitia shipyards. And Picard completely dismisses it. Well, and he dismisses it on the basis of, why would the Romulans blow up the ships meant to save them? Which is logical, except if you read the Countdown comic, the Romulans were totally irrational. They actually betrayed Picard, tried to take over his ship, and then the Tal Shiar was actually trying to blow up his ship. So already the comic has become meaningless. You know what I mean? Because it does. If they had just had a little line like whatever that planet was, the colony, and if Raffi had just said, "Don't you remember?" blah blah blah, just a little throwaway line for the comic book, and then Picard could be like, he could say something. If they want to dismiss it, it'd be like, "Well, that was a little bit different situation. I just don't think, blah 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 blah." But no. So already it's like the comic book is already worthless because it could have tied into this scene very well, this opening scene, and they could have kind of talked about all they have to do is put that little Easter egg for people who read the comic and say, well, don't you remember, that planet, whatever the name of it was, the Romulan colony they were trying to evacuate. And then because in the Countdown comic, exactly what Picard is saying, oh, well, the Romulans would never do this. That's exactly what they do in the comic book. They sabotage their own rescue mission. Literally, is what they do in the Countdown comic book, is they sabotage their own rescue mission.
And that's kind of the thing. I mean, it's just this. I don't know. I mean, because Picard could have mentioned, when she said, "Well, I suspect that Tal," he said, "Oh, did what happened on the Verity give you a clue?" Because they tried to blow. I mean, just one. I mean, and he could have kind of snickered a little bit, and then we would have realized that they both know, obviously, the Tal Shiar is behind what's going on. But no one. Then it makes the fact that no one believes them even worse, because then you realize, well, wait a minute. If the Federation understands that the Tal Shiar tried to destroy the USS Verity, plus they imprisoned Picard on this planet with Raffi, then they're definitely turning a blind eye. They're just turning a blind eye. They don't want to get involved. They suggest or imply that there's elements within the Starfleet and the Federation that would just assume let the Romulans die anyway. Which is, it reminds me of that that moment in it was Kirk in
Star Trek 6.
Star Trek 6.
Let them die.
Or Kirk, yeah.
Let them die.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that. So, the idea that some people would feel that way in Starfleet, I wouldn't have any issue with that, because we have. See, that's the thing. They make it out like we've never seen this kind of stuff before. That this is breaking new ground in Star Trek, and that's what I keep coming back to. It's like we've explored the idea of people harboring, bad feelings, potentially racist, or specious, how we look at tendencies, with different groups of people. And we explore that concept in Star Trek 6, the idea of a character suffering from addiction. I mean, how many different ways did we explore that just in Next Gen alone? Whether you want to talk about the weird little game that shot the things into their eyes, or remember there was I think it was season 1, talking about going back to the Star Trek films, the guy Judson Scott, who played Khan's implied son or whatever on Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
He was in that episode.
Next Gen, that was the drug episode, essentially. Yeah,
exactly. They keep acting like we've never seen these concepts explored before, and I'm like, well, you have.
Well, here's the thing, if you want to be respectful to Trek, and there's a line later in this. Oh, there's so much to get through with this too. We got to go forward in the episode because I'm just stuck right here right now. But the thing is, if Raffi had been an alien, you know what I mean, and she's not a human being, then you know what? She can have all the addictions she wants and all that kind of stuff, and you can explore that path as much as you want. The whole point is that humans are supposed to be beyond this. You know, we talked about this with our review of the City on the Edge of Forever comic book, and one of the big reasons that comic book did, you know, that original teleplay didn't go forward was because they had a member of Starfleet who was a drug dealer, and Roddenberry said, "No frickin' way. That is not the future that I want to present. We're not doing that." And he was right. That's what makes Star Trek unique. It's the idea that humans have evolved beyond those kinds of things, you know. But you can still have an alien doing that. That's fine. You know, if you want to go down that path and you want to show this struggle with addiction and all that kind of stuff, because apparently that's what the actress is really into. That's what she said in the Ready Room. She wants to present that. That's fine. You can do it in Trek. Just don't make it a human being. You know what I mean? Just make it an alien, because humans are not supposed to be like that. That's the idea. You know, that's the idea in my head. That's the idea. You can still explore that. And you can still have that character. Just don't make it a human.
And here's the thing I don't understand too. She's living like in this trailer, like out at the Vasquez Rocks, right?
Yeah, the trailer park. I mean, what the hell was that?
And I'm trying. You know, we've kind of established that the economics of the future is different because this is not removed too many years from next gen. So it's like, well, hasn't she chosen to live in this trailer at
exactly.
the Vasquez Rocks?
I hated that line where she was like, "Oh, well, you were just been at your chateau and all that kind of stuff." It really like is like it's really like a little bit of like almost like class warfare. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, look at the way you live and the way that I live. And like you said, in the context of Star Trek, she chose to live that way, because in Star Trek, we know that the economics are supposed to be different. And the fact of the matter is, there is no poverty in the world, in Earth. They've said that a million times in virtually every single iteration of Star Trek that's been emphasized, that was one of the big things that Earth did. That's one of the big differences with humans is they don't suffer from poverty. They don't suffer from homelessness. They don't suffer from a lack of food. Everything is in abundance. Cisco in Deep Space Nine, which is one of the darker Star Trek, said Earth is a paradise. The reason that they don't understand, the Maquis, the reason they don't understand, the demilitarized zone situations, because they look outside and it's paradise. So they can't conceptualize the problems on the frontier. But this lady lives in a trailer. Raffi lives in a trailer.
And this honestly, in my mind, this goes all the way back to the idea that we're just stuck on Earth for too long. If she had been living on some Federation colony and she was in this situation, perfect, and Picard goes out there to bring her on, he's like, I need you on this mission because of what happened with us and the Romulans, and this will give you a chance to, kind of redeem yourself in Starfleet's eyes. And again, if this had been applied with a more classic Trek structure, and he could be helping her to kind of redeem herself, and because of what happened, maybe she was isolated and alienated, and she didn't feel like she fit in, and she's on this planet somewhere living in this, Federation, cargo hold trailer thing or whatever. And she's ashamed. She feels like she can't go back, or whatever, and she does have an addiction. There's a way you can explore that idea.
No, that's
just
perfect.
Move it on Earth.
Just put her on a different planet. It's a colony. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's makeshift. Perfect. Done. And now it's fine. Instead, they just assaulted another huge tenant, another huge pillar of Star Trek has been assaulted in this show. And I don't appreciate it. I do not appreciate it. And the irony is, they actually, in the episode, they talk about this idea of a shared narrative framework that supposedly the Borgified Romulans need for therapy. It's this really weird idea, right? But the fact that they use that terminology, the shared narrative framework, I felt like that was such a huge slap in the face to like hardcore fans be like, wait, you don't think I see what you guys are doing with our shared narrative framework? And you're actually going to put that in the episode? as if I didn't notice that, that you actually are saying that. That's the kind of stuff that just, because remember, I always come from a lore perspective, world building perspective. Continuity is important to me. Those kinds of things, and that kind of stuff just makes me insane. I can't stand that kind of stuff. It's like, if you want to play in the Star Trek world, just follow a few little rules here and there, and you can do what you want. And if you want to do something different, well, don't do Star Trek. You know what I mean? Because you're not doing Star Trek at this point. So, yeah, I had to say that with the shared narrative framework remark, which we hadn't got to the Borg cube yet. But the problem with this episode is it jumps around all over the place. Once we actually get past this scene, it's jumping from the chateau to the ship to then we have the assault on the chateau, and then we're on the Borg cube, and it keeps going back and forth, and it's kind of a messed up narrative, really.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't understand. There's a lot of things in this episode that just kind of, I didn't understand what they were trying to do. Now, to emphasize that concept. Oh, okay. Go ahead and read Bobby's comment.
He says, is the obvious pandering to the younger crowd taking precedence over the things that always made Trek successful? It's a question. He's talking about things like vaping and cursing, and that's, absolutely, I think it is. They're, and I don't even know if they're pandering to a younger crowd necessarily, because I think there's even an older crowd out there that's never gotten Star Trek and that's never liked it. And this show is made for them. You know what I mean? It's like, this show is made for people that hate Star Trek. It's made by people who hate Star Trek for people who hate Star Trek. I'm talking about Kurtzman in particular. I'm not talking about Chabon. I will actually have kinder words for Chabon, even as we talk about his comments. But Kurtzman has gone on record saying he doesn't like Star Trek. Never did. And it's very clear, you know what I mean, in this kind of stuff. So as I said, the formula is taking a back seat, and I agree. I think the what makes Star Trek is very much absent from these shows so far. Very much absent from this story so far. The pillars are not there. They're just not. You know what I mean? Now, to be fair, as much as I disliked episode 2, and I said as much as I disliked episode 2, there were some things I actually kind of enjoyed, or at least found a little intriguing in this episode. And Dave, I think you actually touched on it earlier. You were talking about the pilot,
right?
The pilot of the ship.
Before, because I do want to get into positive things, but I do want to point out something else that I thought was a little odd. If you could share my screen, I want to point something out. Okay, so on my screen right here, what I have, this is an image of Lieutenant Jessie Supernova Star. She is a character that's going to be in Volume 2 of Red Skirts. She is a fighter pilot. There's actually, you can't see it, but actually here, this is actually her fighter spacecraft. Although they're going to look different in the show, but she's got a helmet, but she's a fighter pilot, kind of akin to Battlestar Galactica. Okay. We put sunglasses on her because pilots sometimes wear sunglasses, so we thought it'd be funny to put aviators, because this is a humorous series, because why would she be wearing aviator sunglasses in space on board a, you know what I mean? It's kind of silly, right?
Exactly.
Did the sunglasses thing bother you too, or is it just me?
That took me out of it so bad. I mean, we all know that Vulcans have like 2 eyelids. They live on a planet with like 3 suns, and they don't need sunglasses. But the other thing is, what other people were talking about was they even look like cheap sunglasses. What I thought that was, I think clearly what that was an MIB reference that a lot of people would understand and be like, oh, she's the head of Starfleet security, so she's like a man in black. I swear that's exactly what they were thinking. That's actually, Chabon addresses that in the video that I plan to show. So Chabon, people asked about that for sure. They were like, "What the hell is that?" But the problem is, if you're into Trek, you understand Trek. If you're a big fan, stuff like that takes you out of the show. And you're like, am I in the future, or am I like sitting here right now? And I would say every single character so far, including Picard, reacts like a contemporary American. Not even like we're not even talking about other cultures or anything on our own planet. They all act like Americans on this show. They react like Americans. They talk like Americans. Even the ones that have accents, by the way, because we have some Irish accents in this show, British accents in this show, they still act like Americans. Nobody acts like there's any other cultures or alien races. Everybody seems to act like contemporary Americans. And it's like, geez, whose fault is that? Is that the director's fault? Is that just the dialogue? I mean, what is it? I mean, there's a clear tone here that is so contemporary, it just totally takes you out of the narrative.
Yeah, there was just a lot of things. The cursing doesn't bother me as much as it probably should. But there's just all these other sort of weird surface things, the vaping, the sunglasses, just this other stuff. And I wish they would think more, like, if you want to contemporize it, like if they feel that's necessary, I wish they would look more at what they're doing, with the story, with the characters themselves, and just finding a way to do it where it just doesn't seem as off-putting.
Well, maybe they should do something instead of Star Trek, is what I say. You know what I mean? So that
possible.
To me, at this point, I feel like they're just using the name. But we've hit so many of the things that Chabon talked about. I'm gonna put up the Chabon comments for you, because you know what, I do appreciate him actually taking the time to address some of this stuff. I don't necessarily like his answers, but here, we'll go through this because he addresses some of the stuff we've just talked about. So the first one we got here is, you're a Star Trek fan watching Star Trek Picard. You have questions. All right, first right off the bat, what's the deal with Commodore O's sunglasses? Everyone knows Vulcans have evolved an inner eyelid to protect them from the intense glare of their homeworld's 3 suns. This is Chabon's response. What, therefore,
might we logically infer?
Question mark.
That she's Romulan?
I don't know. Even if she's Romulan, I still think those are cheap sunglasses.
I would assume that they're saying that she's not Vulcan. She's something. I kind of half thought that for half a second, but I just.
So the other thing is the vaping. So is Raffi vaping? Please tell me Raffi is not vaping. So it explains, Raffi is using a traditional Orion flash pipe known as a Hargle. It's been employed for centuries on that world to sublimate the fleshy tendrils of an intoxicant plant known as, I can't even read that. Looks the name. Popularly, it's called snake leaf. That's what she calls it. She calls it snake leaf in the episode. Raffi calls it snake leaf.
Right.
So I don't know how that really answered the question. He's just giving this sort of, I guess, weird in-universe explanation that this is apparently a drug that's popular with the Orion Syndicate. And of course, we know the Orion Syndicate are not really good people. They're pirates. So I guess that's what that's supposed to be about. So
which again, if she was off-world on some
that makes sense, right? Yeah.
Where they're again, because Picard could have hopped on a Federation ship to get to an outpost because he's got to get to a non-Federation ship. And it's
or she could be you could be staying in an Orion controlled world. You know what I mean? Then people get it. Oh, the Orions are criminals, blah, blah, blah. I get it. That makes sense now.
She's a pirate. She has connections to this pirate guy. They're going to use his ship. Clearly, they're not Federation, but like
Right.
it's Starfleet. There's a different way to still get here without making it seem so. I don't know.
So then we got another person going back to sunglasses. Says, okay, but sunglasses and vape pens, and then they actually crossed it out with what he called it, which is a Horgol. I guess Horgol is what he calls it
Right.
in the universe. And like Girardi uses earbuds. He says even if people still use those things in 2399, that's the year, shouldn't they all be more futuristic? So here's Chabon's response, and you can tell Chabon's a good writer with his response here. So it says, okay, you know what? We actually thought about that a lot. When you are making a show that's set in the future, you have to ask yourself constantly how people will be meeting daily needs and performing everyday tasks. And I would say, actually, you don't, but that's what he's focusing on here. Says so. One guiding principle is that some fundamental objects and tools evolve in ideal form. He's showing a knife, for instance, there, and a bottle of wine. Efficient, economical, comfortable, durable, practical, effective, and useful. And afterward change very little, except as subject to fashion, which itself is often retrospective. And I don't disagree with that. I mean that is true. There are some classical things, although I would say in the context over the time period we're talking about, maybe not so much. But anyway, he's giving examples like this, like a wine bottle, a knife, books. They haven't changed a whole lot over time. That's his premise there. Certainly, any human civilization in which all the objects and appearances of everyday life were brand new, of recent invention, and thoroughly contemporary in design would be truly unprecedented. Except that's exactly what we have in Star Trek. In Star Trek, that's the way the aesthetic has always been. There's also another thing to think about here, which is, you're like, okay, Chabon, how much Star Trek do you actually know? Civilization was wiped out at one point in the Star Trek world. The Star Trek world, they had World War III and basically destroyed the planet and almost killed everybody themselves. Okay? So a lot of that past stuff is gone. You know what I mean? I always thought it was kind of weird that the Golden Gate Bridge survived. Like that's something that I thought about, in my head is how the hell did the Golden Gate Bridge even survive that nuclear war and devastation and everything like that, But in the context of Star Trek, first of all, we've always had new objects that aren't contemporary. That's exactly the style of Star Trek from the beginning, especially the original series, actually. Ironically, the oldest show was the one that was like the most different, and we never hardly ever saw anything that was contemporary. And then you talk about this idea that, it would be unprecedented human civilization. Not if human civilization was essentially wiped out. You know what I mean? If we had this massive nuclear war, guess what? There wouldn't be a whole lot of old stuff left, would there? So it's like, okay, hey, he's trying at least. I'm just not buying what he's selling. All right, so we have this character, which actually this character is probably one of the most intriguing to me personally. He says, okay, but what about Rios's tobacco habit? One thing we know for sure about the future Star Trek is that humans have at least come to their senses about this particular unhealthy and obnoxious practice. It's like, yeah, you really would not think in the Star Trek world that they would still use tobacco. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. He says, yes, but here's the thing about Rios. He studiously maintains a lot of seemingly outmodeled habits, practices, and pursuits, many, but by no means all of them connected to his ancient Latin American heritage. All right. Okay. I'm just going to call a spade there. That's like a racist comment. That's basically saying that you're enhancing a racist stereotype that, Latinos and Hispanics all smoke. That's essentially almost what he's saying there. Okay. Are there a lot that do? Like, you have the Cuban cigar thing? Yeah, that's a big thing, right? I mean, it's undeniable. But that's a stereotype. That's a stereotype. That's what that is, right? I mean, I don't know how else you interpret that, but that's basically what he's saying is, hey, it's Latinos, they smoke, right? They smoke cigars. And so then he does this. Would you believe synthagars? That, just like synthahol? I'll give him that. At least he was clever and tried to come back after that and said, okay, would you believe that they're synthagars, like synthahol? You know what I mean? There's no addictive property. And by the way, no, we wouldn't believe that because that's clearly not the case. The guy is has a shard of like metal in his arm and he's smoking and drinking to dull the pain. You know what I mean? No, it's not a synthagar, but at least he understands that much about Star Trek.
Well, and I was just gonna say, it's like, well, in a sense, isn't that what vaping is? Like, it's theoretically, that's what vaping was generally sold.
You can't even say that now because you're going to offend somebody by saying that, because now people are saying vaping is terrible and the worst thing ever. And who do you believe? But, you know what I mean? So,
but it was sold when it was originally marketed and sold as an alternative to smoking that's not as unhealthy. So correct. Vaping is essentially the synthagar or synthagol or whatever. Like that's what vaping theoretically is. So it's like, shouldn't he be vaping just like Rafi's vaping then? Like if it's a synthetic thing, will there be, and then there's a commonality. It's like, hey, they both vape together. Maybe they're friends, they're vaping buddies. I don't know. I don't. Yeah.
So I'll let the folks. I will provide a link for this when I edit the videos later. By the way, Bobby Chambers says face palm. I agree with you. I mean, I don't know. I think Chabon is a good writer. I really do. I don't think he's a terrible writer or anything like that. I mean, he won a Pulitzer Prize, so I'm not going to sit there and say he's a hack. But that doesn't mean he's a good television writer. Doesn't mean he's a good showrunner. Doesn't mean he understands Star Trek. So
and I'm just going to say his show Unbelievable on Netflix is really, really good. So he is a good writer. He's a talented writer, and he might love Trek. But whenever you're involved with properties, and this as well as I do, Eric. Whenever you're involved,
can you go back because I lost you for a second and I didn't hear what you were saying about Chabon. So
I was just going to say his show Unbelievable on Netflix is really, really good, and I highly recommend people check it out. It's very good, especially if you love things like Mindhunter. Like if you enjoyed Mindhunter is a great show on Netflix. That's not one of his shows, but he is a showrunner and he did write several episodes of Unbelievable. It's a very, very good show. So he is a talented writer, and I know from Unbelievable that he is a talented showrunner. But all I was just going to say is that I know personally, and I know this, this as well, Eric, that whenever you have a valuable property and, there's a lot of different people who have a stake in it, even though you may write something or you may create something, by the time the final form ends out on the other side, it may not even been what you originally intended in the first place.
Well, we know that's the case with Chabon. We know he said that's the case, that his initial pitch was thrown in the garbage. Those were like his words. His pitch that got Patrick Stewart to do this show, they threw it in the trash. And he said none of that stuff made it into the show. That's what he said on the Ready Room.
Yeah. And seriously, I mean, this is such a simple fix in my mind. Picard needs to get on a non-Starfleet Federation ship. He hitches a ride to an outpost. We get him in space faster. He goes to, basically, it's, an off-world colony, and, off of Earth, I mean, like some colony planet, right? And he's there. They're on the fringe of something. Obviously, Romulan space would make sense, right? They'd be on the fringe of what used to be the Romulan Star Empire. And that's where he picks up Raffi, right? And this colony has dealings with the Orion Syndicate, because the Orion Syndicate has moved in. Maybe they're doing black market deals, or they're
trading the snakeweed.
Exactly.
It's
And so it's like you explain all that. She has the connection with the pirate guy who likes to smoke the cigars, or he also vapes or whatever. It's like all of a sudden, all you do is you just take it off Earth, you put it somewhere else, we get into space sooner, and all of a sudden these people's vices and habits make sense because they're not even on Earth anymore.
Yep.
They're out here, they're basically pirates. It's like, then if they smoke or they got peg legs or, friggin' parrots, nobody questions it. Of course he's got a space parrot that smokes a cigar. He's a pirate.
And we also have that
holographic parrot.
Well, we have in Deep Space Nine, we have there was a story about O'Brien infiltrating the Orion Syndicate. And as I recall, the guy that he was friends with, I can't remember if he was an alien or not, but he was a very human-looking alien if he was an alien. But the idea was obviously humans do interact with the Orion Syndicate because O'Brien's human and they accept him as part of the syndicate. So this is unprecedented, and I'm fine. You can explore the outer reaches of the Federation a lot more than I think Earth. That's the bottom line. Earth is a paradise. That's the idea. Earth is a paradise. Humans on Earth are more evolved, all that kind of stuff. Those are pillars of Star Trek. Pillars that Star Trek is built on. And you when you take those pillars away, that's when you screw everything up. And the thing is, you just came up in like a minute. Literally, you were only talking for like 2 minutes and fixed the story to make it Star Trek, and they could and still do their narrative. You didn't change the plot of the story at all. You just made it Trek. You know what I mean? You made it actually within the context of Star Trek because you care about Star Trek. You know this stuff. Why couldn't they do that? And Bobby says 60-second fix. You fixed, and you didn't even change the story. 60-second fix, and now it's Star Trek. Now I like your show. Now I want to watch your show. Now I want to support your show. I want to promote your show because I'm a Trekkie, and I think that's awesome. I get it. Orion Syndicate. And the fact of the matter is, with Chabon's in-world explanation that this drug is in fact an Orion drug. Why not put that in the show?
It could be that Orion drug could be this other subplot that's running throughout the entire series, and we could be looking at not just drug dealing, but if we want to look at different segments of society or different things that normally we don't spend a lot of time with, the kind of the economics and the social political impact of drug running as it relates to other things such as immigration, slavery, whether you want to talk about prostitution. Like there's so many different. There are ways that you can explore themes and ideas that we don't normally see in Star Trek, and you can and this could be an interesting subplot. I don't, because it gets even worse. It's like Picard hops on a Federation starship, right? He's still out of Starfleet. He just uses his connections to get a jump seat, right? Like that makes sense, right? He's going to get a jump seat, and he hitches a ride on a Federation starship. We get some beautiful shots of a new Federation, a new Starfleet ship that we haven't seen before. We get to see some upgraded tech that takes care of our we don't look futuristic enough idea. We get into space faster, but then, hey, you know what? Let's find a next gen, a Voyager, a Deep Space Nine beloved, side character, and they've been promoted to captain, and it's their ship. So we get a legacy guest star. All in one episode. They don't have to have a lot of scenes. They just show up in Picard's room and they go, "Hey, I'm happy to provide you the shuttle service." You know what I mean? And they could have a little witty banter.
That's fan service done right. Like if God rest his soul, if it was Captain Nog, for instance, you know what I mean? Something like that. If it had been him, and that's all he does, and it's a cameo. He just ferries Picard over here, you know, that kind of thing, and that's it. You know what I mean? He says, "I wish I could help you more, Admiral, but you know, it is what it is. I'm glad I could do this for you." You know what I mean? Something like that. They could have done something really cool like that, and
you get the classic inspiring Trek theme when you see the ship fly by. You get the hum, you know, inside the ship. You know, we get to use the transporters a little bit more because we got to get down to the planet. We got to get on the ship. I mean, it's like, to me, I don't understand why this is so difficult. It's like they are so concerned, and this is my big problem. They are so concerned with dealing with real world problems that they're literally like tying it around this show's ankles, you know, like a weight, and it's literally pulling it down. It's like, you can still do all this stuff. It's not that you can't do this stuff in Star Trek. We've seen characters with addiction problems before. That's not anything new. You may do it in a way that's different, and they could still be, again, all be ex Starfleet. You can still do the same thing. It's just a couple little changes, and all of a sudden it's a little bit more. They're so concerned with saying, in my mind anyway, and apologies to anyone who takes this the wrong way. I feel like they're so obsessed with the political spin on the show that it's hurting the show.
Well, that's what Akiva said in the previous Ready Room. That's what I took from his comments with Will Wheaton when Akiva was interviewed in the second episode of the Ready Room. I felt that all over the place in the things that he was saying, and he was admitting to that. That's what this show is. And it just takes away so much from Star Trek, in my opinion, because they're going to use the defense that, oh, well, Star Trek has always done stuff like this. Not the way you're doing it. Not the way you're doing it. You know, I'll give a great example from the classic series, and I wish I remember the name of the episode. But in the original series, they had an episode that was about the Vietnam War. It was absolutely about the Vietnam War, and the premise was that they went to a planet, a very primitive planet, that Kirk had surveyed as a young officer, and he had met the indigenous people, and there were basically two sets of people. There were these like hill people that were very sort of tribal and very, very primitive, and then there were like these town people that had like these kind of small Pueblo type towns and stuff like that, but they lived in harmony. You know what I mean? There was a difference, but they lived in harmony. What has happened since Kirk was there is the Klingons found this planet, and what do? They find the more civilized people in the towns, start arming them with weapons, with flintlocks, because these people use bows and arrows. They start arming them with flintlocks to kill the hill people and take over the planet for the glory of the Klingon Empire. You know?
Yeah.
Kirk finds out about this. He stumbles into this situation. He realizes that the only thing that he can do is try to help the hill people to balance out the contamination from the Klingons. This is the framework of the Vietnam War. The idea of the Soviet Union supplying, North Vietnam, while the United States, France before it, was supplying, South Vietnam. And this is totally analogous to Vietnam. But it wasn't. The thing is, it was obvious, but it wasn't. That the context is very different, even though there's all sorts of parallels. It was the situation was the same, but it wasn't like they were trying to say this or that about the Vietnam War. If you watch the episode basically comes up with the idea that this is a really crappy situation, and we're not really sure what we should be doing. It's not pro-Vietnam War. It's not anti-Vietnam War. It's simply presenting the problem and letting you realize this is a problem. This is a complicated problem, and there's really no good answer in this. That's what that episode was about. Because Kirk doesn't come to the conclusion we shouldn't help these people. They're debating it. They don't come to a conclusion straight out. You know what I mean? They realize that the whole situation is just a complete cluster. You know what I mean? It's a messed up situation. And there isn't like this huge like pro-Vietnam or anti-Vietnam you can take from it. Pro-Vietnam people could take something from that episode and use it. Anti-Vietnam people could take something from that episode and use it. Well, it simply presents the problem.
And I tried to pull up some information. I think the episode you're referring to is Errand of Mercy.
It might be.
Because I think that was the one that introduced the Organians, if I remember correctly.
No, that's a different one.
Is that a different one?
That's a similar premise. The Organian one is a similar premise, but it's because it also involves the Klingons taking over a primitive civilization. But that's a different episode. That's the one with Korg, with Baltar, the great with John Calicos.
John Calicos. Yeah,
that's not the episode I'm talking about. I'm talking about a different one, but everybody knows that episode who knows TOS. And some people are using that episode to justify what Picard is doing. But I'm just like, no, you don't get it, do you? Because that episode didn't take sides. That episode framed the argument and let the audience make their own conclusions. You know what I mean? It let people that were pro-Vietnam come away with something, and people that were anti-Vietnam come away with something. It didn't take a side. It didn't take a blatant stance and say, you're right, you're wrong, which is what Picard is doing. Picard's doing a lot of this.
Yeah. A private little war.
That sounds right. Yeah, private little war. That sounds right.
Wow, this is full of like just teleplay by Gene Roddenberry, directed by Mark Daniels, season 2, episode 19. Originally broadcast February 2nd, 1968.
Classic episode, and it's being used to justify Picard, and I say no, because it's all about execution. And when you start to alienate, like an entire section of the fan base for political reasons, that episode didn't do that. That episode did not do that. However you felt about that issue, you came away with something, and you could use that in your own arguments and say, well, Star Trek, they said this. You know what I mean? So
right.
Because they understood the situation. They understood, like, we can't be letting the Klingons get away with this. But at the same time, it's like, but now we're destroying their civilization anyway. So what are we really doing? You know what I mean? Because now the Hill people aren't the peaceful Hill people anymore. Now they're, they even had a whole thing where the leader of the Hill people was starting to hate the other side because they end up killing his wife and everything like that. And he learns to hate. That's the end of the episode. And then they're kind of like, okay, now they hate him. Now we have our side. That was what happened at the end of the episode. Was the Hill people's wife was killed, and he ends up deciding, all right, now I'll do your war, Kirk. I'll fight those Klingon inspired bastards till they're all dead. You know what I mean? And that's where that's what it leads to. That's the bigger picture, right? That's what war leads to. No matter whether you're right or you're wrong or anything like that, it's going to lead in a lot of death and destruction, and people are going to die, and that's a universal theme. It's not saying Vietnam was good or bad, which is what Picard would do. Picard would say, Vietnam bad. That's it. Like with a club over your head. There's no nuance. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And Bobby had another comment. He says, we watch and read amazing stories to get away from real world problems. Thank you, Bobby. That's why I like sci-fi, because I want to get away from reality. Said it's getting old that everyone uses every platform possible to push social views. And I agree with you, Bobby. Says, I don't mind some of it, but it's become almost everything. That's the problem. It's like, no, I don't mind some of it either. I don't mind artists trying to express ideas or try to make the world better, but do it in a creative way. Do it in a way where you don't start polarizing everything and everyone. You know what I mean? Take the high road. Take the stealing is wrong approach instead of giving me a very specific example of like Les Miserables, where the guy stole a loaf of bread and now the police officer's chasing him for the rest of his life. Okay. Right. Stealing is still wrong. Okay. Stealing is still wrong. But clearly in that situation, it's like, hey, the guy was starving to death and you don't need to make his life a living hell for, right? You know what I mean? Right. There are ways to do this is what I'm trying to say. There are ways to do this.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. That's kind of my big thing. Cause it just doesn't make it a lot of fun. Like the first episode, I rewatched the first episode because it was a lot of fun things I enjoyed. I like the action sequences with Daj. I liked the opening sequence with Data on board the Enterprise. I liked a lot of the imagery like where Data's painting the daughter. Like there was a lot of fun, interesting ideas in the first episode, and as we move on, we're just kind of stuck in kind of similar places and just mired in kind of the same thing. I'm hoping now that we're getting out into space, maybe now it'll feel more like Trek, and something more interesting is going to come from it. I hope. I just had a. I mean, it did, like I said, this episode was better than the last one. It did have some fun action sequences in it. I did think it was interesting. We saw the caretakers. We saw them, with skills, and then I actually paused it so I could explain to my wife who didn't read the Countdown comic. Oh, these guys are kind of like James Bond, special agent, like spy type people. That's why they know how to do this, because they didn't really, because I imagine a lot of people were kind of confused. I mean, they kind of get it. It's like, okay, well, she's ex-Tal Shiar, he's ex-Tal Shiar. Okay, whatever. I don't know. It just, to me, just a lot of this is just kind of, it's weird because they don't want to give us Trek tropes, but they want us to understand an awful lot.
I love that.
We're not gonna do, because it's like, we're not gonna do a Trek trope. We're not gonna show you something that you should, that's just classic whatever, because you've seen that 1,000 times, but we're gonna assume that you already know all this. We're gonna assume you understand the Tal Shiar is like special forces people, because the people who were after Dodge, they clearly told us were not the Tal Shiar, they were someone else.
They're the super Tal Shiar, which does not mean they should actually kick the caretakers' asses.
Yeah, you would think
they're the even better Tal Shiar. That's one thing I was like, that to me is a logical inconsistency. No, I get it. Like if you want to be really realistic, how is a Delta Force guy and a SEAL gonna how would that kind of fight go down with a Delta Force and a SEAL? You assume a Delta Force is actually better than a SEAL because they're supposed to be a more elite organization than the SEALs. But in practical terms, would it probably be pretty even? Yeah, I'll grant you that. But when you're doing a TV show, you know what I mean? You're talking about, right. Well, these are supposed to be the super Tal Shiar. These are supposed to be like the really good guys. And they just clean their clocks. They you know what I mean? The caretakers clean their clocks.
I was shocked that one of the caretakers didn't die.
That would have made it better.
They showed up, I was like going, okay, who's gonna get it? It's gonna be the dude or the lady. Who's gonna get it? Because one of them is not gonna survive this if the car wash or the vat wash or whatever they're called, if they're as bad as they said they are, then one of them clearly, because I remember watching, I was like, oh, one of them's gonna die, right? It's like maybe he'll have one of them will have an interesting little bit of dialogue that will inform what's going on. But no, they both survived, and I'm just like, yeah. Well, and the Romulan,
and I, what I didn't understand also was, why didn't they go with Picard? The security of the chateau was compromised. There's a little throwaway line. He said the alarms didn't work or whatever. So the security of the chateau has clearly been compromised. Why not just leave? I mean, the chateau is clearly not safe. Why does Picard leave his slaves behind, at the chateau? I mean, I didn't understand, especially when they're shown to be useful. They're obviously useful. You know what I mean? So why not bring them with you?
Well, and one of them actually I think, I can't remember if it was the dude or the lady, but one of them actually makes the comment, you need someone to help protect you. And they spend time showing us that Picard's age is catching up to him. Spoiler alert, we know Picard's dying of something. So it's like, you would think they would go with him, or shocker, in my version of the story, one of them dies because they're not as efficient as I don't know. I keep
Super Tal Shiar. The Super Tal Shiar.
Yeah, the Super Tal Shiar. They're not as bad as the Super Tal Shiar. So one of them would die, and the other one would go on that journey, to get him to the pirate crew that's somewhere off in space. So,
but you saw the preview, right? You saw the preview at the end for the next episode?
Yeah, that's the Romulan, like the camp, and the
You see
the
that?
Lord of the Rings guy. Yeah.
Did you see this image before?
Yeah, I saw that actually on. I did see that someone actually was posting that around. Um,
This is what we're
it's
getting.
like,
This is Picard's protector. Even though the caretakers clearly are capable, clearly could do this role. We've already seen them in 3 episodes. Now, episode 4, we got to introduce yet another character, and this is going to be Picard's protector, the Romulan elf.
wow. Well, there you go. I guess. I don't know. Hopefully, it's. I don't know.
Well, I'll
I
say this: I can end this on a good note in my terms and say that it is a better episode than episode 2.
yes.
We now at least have a complete story.
Yeah.
We have like one story. Took us 3 episodes to get one story, with a beginning, middle to end.
Yeah.
But at least we have that. And now we go forward. We know we got to pick up Romulan elf guy. We know that's going to happen. Oh, by the way, did you catch the north and south thing to explain the foreheads?
Yeah, I did.
Do you remember back in the day? That's how they used to, not canon, but fans. That's how they explained the TOS Klingons versus the new Klingons. That was a fan theory back in the day. So I wonder maybe somebody knew that. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people criticize that, and I get the criticism. But back in the day, the fan theory about why the TOS Klingons look different than the movie Klingons is because they're from different hemispheres. That was the theory that used to go around the convention floor. I remember that as a kid. People used to talk about that. They talked about that on stage to explain it and stuff like that. Not anybody from the show, just fans, people, organizers and stuff like that. It was a fan theory.
I have a weird thought and an observation. During a lot of the episodes, you bring up that documentary. What is it? Crisis on the Bridge.
Yeah,
they may have got the name wrong.
Chaos on the Bridge. Chaos on the Bridge.
And then I know from having actually listened on Audible, I did the 50-year history. That starts with the creation of the original pilot all the way through to where the first, I think first or second, the J.J. Abrams films, and they take all these interviews and all this information and they compile it together to put together like a complete view of Star Trek's history. And one of the recurring themes that comes up in a lot of stuff is the issues that people had with Gene, where someone would have an idea or a concept or something they wanted to do, and Gene would say, well, that's not Star Trek, so we can't do that. I have this weird feeling it's the opposite now, that there's someone in there going, well, that's old Star Trek. We're not doing that.
No, that's exactly what it is now. I mean, come on. That's not even something that you can argue. You know what I mean? They clearly are taking, again, Chaos on the Bridge. I totally recommend it for people. It's so good in terms of the history and the drama of making Next Generation and what the writers really thought. And we've talked about this. One of the biggest things that they hated was the no conflict rule, that the humans are not supposed to be, fighting each other. They're not supposed to be having all these problems like modern humans. And then they'd be like, well, how can you have a story without conflict? And again, my response has always been, you use the aliens to do that. You use the aliens, then you can show the conflict. And of course, they don't do that in this one. You know what I mean? So, it can be done. It's just it takes effort. It takes effort. You have to know what you're doing. You have to understand what you're doing. You have to understand the world building, the pillars of Trek. But, right now, they're just trying to take all the pillars down.
Yeah, it does appear that way. Do you have anything else, or is that good for this episode?
Well, like I said, I'll try to end on a good note and say it is better than episode 2.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
And at least we have a full story at this point.
Yeah. I would agree. I did like it much better than the second episode, and I did like the fact that we actually got into a ship, and we got a semblance of what the crew's going to be like. I kind of like the pirate captain guy. He's got the opposite. That's his emergency medical hologram. And I guess for him, I would imagine for him as an actor, it's got to be fun to play such different characters,
Yeah.
That all that stuff was fun. And all I kept thinking of is like, why couldn't we have gotten here faster? Because I kept hearing Patrick Stewart in interviews talking about how, the actors are doing interesting things and that people will like the crew. And it's by the time we got everyone together on the ship, I was like, well, this is kind of an interesting assemblage of people. I don't care for Raffi too much, but the pirate captain guy is kind of interesting. I like the scientist, the basically the dataologist, I'm going to call it. She seems interesting. Her connection to Bruce Maddox, I'm really curious to learn more about that, and I'm curious to see where they find Bruce Maddox, if he's even alive. So there are some things I'm very interested in, and it is things that do connect us back to classic Trek. We still have a lot of fun cameos. I'm glad that we didn't burn through, Riker and Troy in these 3 episodes. I'm glad that we have them to look forward to. I'm glad that we have 7 to look forward to. So
I heard 7's in the next episode. That's what I heard, is that 7 is in the next episode. So we'll see if that pans out or not.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it. And like I said, this is a much better episode than the second one. I hate where we've left Starfleet, in such mired disarray. But I'm hoping now that we're actually out in space, that we'll have a lot more fun. It'll be a lot more adventurous. I don't have to have stuff blowing up every 10 minutes, but let's just make it more interesting. All this sitting around on Earth going, whoa, this sucks. Okay, I get it.
It looks like we are going to get our first space battle. They showed the preview. It looks like we're going to see that bird of prey take on the ship that they're on, which I don't remember the name of it. But hey, yeah. Space battle finally, episode 4.
Yeah. Yeah, about time. So that'll be fun. So yeah, so on a positive note, it is better than the second one, and I am looking forward to. We got a lot. I feel like we still have a lot of fun things to look forward to. Maybe some more Brent Spiner Data cameos. You know what I mean? There's still a lot of possibility. So cool.
Oh, and Bobby said, let's give him the last word on this. Says, thank you guys. I look forward to Wednesday nights now, and thanks for the drawing.
Oh, that's awfully kind of you to say, Bobby. We greatly appreciate that. We're glad that you're here, participating, being part of the show. It makes it more fun and entertaining for us. You summed up, this one, the Final Frontier, Eventually, which would have been a great title for this episode, actually.
Yeah, that would be a great title for the episode.
Yeah. If we were doing the podcast, that totally would be the title of this episode, because that's just perfect.
I'll have to do that when I make the clips, because I always take the YouTube version of the show, and I always go back the next day and I break it up by topic. I think I'm going to use your title there, Bobby.
Yeah, that's just perfect. That's just perfect.